I still remember the exact moment I discovered my mother had written me out of her will. It wasn't the inheritance that shattered me. It was finding out how little my happiness meant to her compared to her social status. The day I chose love over family approval, I lost my childhood home, my family heirlooms, and my place in my mother's life. All because I married the wrong guy, according to her country club standards. What I didn't realize then was that losing my inheritance would lead me to discover something far more valuable than anything money could buy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. If you had asked me 5 years ago where I'd be today, my answer would have sounded like a perfectly scripted, society-approved life plan. Running the family business, married to someone from my mother's social circle, living in a house that matched my childhood zip code, and hosting dinner parties where everyone wore pearls and discussed yacht clubs. That was the future carefully mapped out for me since birth. A future I never questioned until I met Ethan. I was 28 when my carefully constructed world began to crack. After graduating with a business degree from my mother's alma mater, as expected, completing an MBA, as expected, and working my way up in our family's investment firm, as expected, I had excelled at every milestone my mother had set for me. Olivia Harrison, dutiful daughter, heir to the Harrison fortune, and pride of the Newport social scene. My mother, Diana Harrison, wasn't just wealthy. She was old money, the kind that speaks in hushed tones about new money, as if it's a contagious disease. Our family had been part of the Newport social elite for 4 generations. The Harrison name opened doors, secured reservations at impossible-to-book restaurants, and commanded respect in circles where lineage mattered more than character. My brother, Maxwell, 3 years younger than me, had always been our mother's favorite, though she would never admit it. He shared her passion for social climbing, her disdain for anything ordinary, and her talent for making others feel subtly inferior. I loved him despite this. He was my brother after all. But where I questioned the emptiness behind our privileged lifestyle, Maxwell embraced it wholeheartedly. That spring, during the annual Harrison Foundation Charity Gala, an event more about being seen than actual charity, Mother had arranged for me to be seated next to Jonathan Whitmore, heir to the Whitmore banking fortune. It wasn't the first time she'd orchestrated such a coincidence. At 28, I was approaching what Mother called the danger zone, still unmarried, still without a suitable man to complete my perfect life tableau. "Olivia, darling," she whispered as she adjusted my pearl necklace before the event. "Jonathan is recently divorced. No children, thank goodness. Caroline says he's looking to settle down again with someone more. Appropriate this time." The way she emphasized appropriate made it clear she thought I fit the bill perfectly. "Mother, please, not tonight," I sighed, already exhausted by the evening ahead. "You're not getting any younger, dear," she said with practiced concern, patting my cheek. "And the Harrison name needs to be joined with the right family. Your father would have wanted this." My father had passed away when I was 22, leaving Mother in control of the family fortune and the family itself. She wielded both with meticulous precision. He had been the softer presence in our home, the one who snuck me ice cream after Mother had declared it too fattening, the one who taught me to sail, even though Mother insisted it would ruin my complexion. I missed him daily. That night at the gala, I performed my role perfectly, laughed at Jonathan's mediocre jokes, asked interested questions about his banking innovations, there were none, and pretended not to notice when his eyes drifted to my décolletage. All the while, Mother watched approvingly from across the room, nodding slightly whenever I maintained the conversation. Maxwell smirked knowingly as he circulated among the guests, already 3 glasses of champagne deep and charming everyone, effortlessly. It was during the silent auction that everything changed. I had stepped outside onto the terrace for a moment of peace, feigning a phone call to escape Jonathan's monologue about his recent trip to Monaco. The spring air was cool, against my skin, carrying the scent of the ocean just beyond the manicured grounds of the Newport Yacht Club. "Not a fan of silent auctions?" a voice asked from the shadows of the terrace. I turned to find a man leaning against the balustrade, his bow tie undone and hanging loosely around his neck. He wasn't wearing the standard-issue tuxedo of the event, but a slightly rumpled dark suit that looked like it had seen better days. "Not a fan of this entire scene," I admitted before I could catch myself. 6 years of proper responses had been erased by one moment of honesty. He laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place among the practiced titters and restrained chuckles inside. "Then that makes 2 of us. I'm only here because my company donated the photography services. I'm supposed to be taking flattering photos of rich people looking charitable." "You're the photographer?" I asked, suddenly curious. Mother would never approve of me talking to staff. "Guilty as charged," he said, stepping into the light. "Ethan Reeves." He wasn't conventionally handsome in the way Jonathan was, with his perfect teeth and country club tan. Ethan's features were more interesting. Kind eyes that crinkled at the corners, dark hair that curled slightly at his temples, and hands that looked like they'd done actual work. "I'm Olivia," I said, deliberately omitting my last name. For one evening, I didn't want to be a Harrison. "Just Olivia?" he asked with a half smile that suggested he knew exactly what I was doing. "Just Olivia," I confirmed. "So, what does a photographer think of when capturing all?" "This?" I gestured toward the opulent ballroom behind us. "Honestly?" he hesitated. "I think about how many meals the cost of one centerpiece could provide at the homeless shelter where I volunteer. On Sundays." His candor surprised me. No one in my circle would ever say something so direct, so uncomfortably true. "That's refreshingly honest," I said. "Sorry," he winced. "That probably sounded judgmental. I know these events raise money for good causes. Some more than others," I admitted. "This one is more about the hosts, social standing than actual charity." We talked for nearly 40 minutes on that terrace, while inside, Mother undoubtedly wondered where I'd disappeared to. Ethan told me about his small photography studio in the artsy part of town, how he balanced commercial work with his true passion for documentary photography. He'd recently returned from 6 months in rural communities around the world, capturing everyday life and resilience in places most of my social circle couldn't find on a map. When Mother finally located me, her face shifted from relief to thinly veiled horror upon seeing my companion. "Olivia, darling, Jonathan has been looking everywhere for you," she said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp as they flicked dismissively over Ethan. "The auction is closing in 10 minutes. "Mother, this is Ethan Reeves," I said, refusing to be extracted without at least the pretense of manners. "He's the photographer for the event." "How nice," she said, in a tone that indicated it was anything but. "If you'll excuse us, Mr. Reeves, Olivia has a $5,000 bid on the Aspen ski weekend that I'm sure someone is trying to outbid as we speak." As she practically dragged me away, Ethan called out, "It was nice meeting." "You just Olivia?" I turned back to see him smiling, and something inside me, something that had been carefully constructed and maintained for 28 years, began to crumble. "Who was that person?" Mother hissed as we re-entered the ballroom. "The photographer you hired," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Well, he shouldn't be fraternizing with guests. I'll speak to the event coordinator." She straightened my necklace again, a nervous habit whenever she felt things slipping from her control. "Jonathan is at our table. He's been telling everyone about the summer house his family just purchased in the Hamptons, adjacent to the Vanderbilts, apparently." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and mindless conversation. Jonathan secured my number, through Mother, not me, and promised to call about dinner the following week. Maxwell charmed a potential investor for his latest venture. Mother received countless compliments on her event. Everything proceeded according to plan, except for the piece of paper burning a hole in my clutch, the one with Ethan's number hastily scribbled on it as Mother had pulled me away. 3 days later, I called him. 2 weeks after that, we had our 5th date. 3 months later, I was sneaking away from family functions to meet him, inventing business meetings and dental appointments to cover my tracks. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alive, laughing without restraint, speaking without filtering every word, experiencing a relationship based on genuine connection rather than social compatibility. Ethan showed me a world beyond the narrow confines of Newport society. We ate at hole-in-the-wall restaurants with incredible food, spent evenings at obscure jazz clubs, and walked for hours along beaches far from the manicured shores near my family's estate. He taught me to see the world through a camera lens, focusing on details I'd never noticed before: the weathered hands of an old fisherman, the perfect geometry of a spider's web, the unguarded joy on children's faces as they played in park. Sprinklers. "You have a natural eye," he told me as we reviewed photos I'd taken during one of our outings. "You see beyond the surface." "I've spent my whole life looking at surfaces," I admitted. "It's all that matters in my world. How things appear, not what they truly are." "And is that enough for you?" he asked, his question gentle but probing. I couldn't answer him then, but the question haunted me, following me into board meetings and charity luncheons and painful dinners with Jonathan, whom Mother had somehow maneuvered into my life despite my obvious disinterest. 6 months into our relationship, Ethan and I were sitting on the small balcony of his apartment above his studio, sharing takeout Chinese food and watching the sunset. His building was in the transitional part of town, as Mother would euphemistically call it if she ever discovered I spent time there. "I got offered a project," he said, twirling noodles around his chopsticks. "National Geographic wants me to document indigenous communities adapting to climate change. 6 locations, 12 months. My heart sank. "That's amazing, Ethan. When do you leave?" "That depends," he said, setting down his food and taking my hand, "on whether you'd consider coming with me." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "Coming with you? For a year? Around the world?" "I know it's crazy," he said quickly. "You have your job, your family, your life here. But these past 6 months, Liv, I've never felt this way about anyone. And I see how alive you become when you're away from all the expectations and pretense. I watch you breathe deeper, laugh louder, become more yourself." "Ethan, I can't just abandon everything." "Can't you?" he challenged gently. "Or is it that you're afraid to discover who you might be without all of it defining you?" That night, as I lay in my perfectly appointed bedroom in the family mansion, staring at the same ceiling I'd stared at since childhood, Ethan's words echoed in my mind. Who was I beyond Olivia Harrison, heir to the Harrison fortune? Who might I become if I stepped away from the path so carefully laid out before me? 2 weeks later, after sleepless nights and endless internal debates, I made my decision. I requested a meeting with Mother in her study, the room where all significant family discussions occurred, where major decisions were announced, where disappointments were addressed with cutting precision. "Mother, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, perched on the edge of the leather chair across from her imposing desk. She looked up from her correspondence, removing her reading glasses. "If this is about the Whitmore Summer Gala, I've already accepted on our behalf. Maxwell has agreed to bring that lovely Peterson girl." "It's not about the gala," I said, steeling myself. "It's about my future. I've been offered an opportunity to travel for a year, documenting indigenous communities for National Geographic." Her perfectly manicured eyebrows rose slightly, the Diana Harrison equivalent of shocked disbelief. You're not a photographer, Olivia. I've been learning, and I'd be assisting someone who is. I carefully avoided mentioning Ethan's name, though I suspected the coming confrontation would inevitably reveal everything. This is absurd, she said dismissively, returning to her correspondence. You have responsibilities here. The Foundation's annual report, the new investment strategy for the Eastern portfolio, not to mention your position on the hospital board. I've already spoken to the team about covering my responsibilities, I pressed on. Everything is arranged. Now I had her full attention. She set down her pen deliberately and fixed me with the penetrating gaze that had made board members and social climbers alike wither. You've arranged this? Without consulting me? Without family discussion? Yes, I said simply. And what about Jonathan? I understand he's planning to propose at the summer regatta. This was news to me, though not entirely surprising given Mother's machinations. I won't be here for the regatta, and I'm not interested in Jonathan's proposal or Jonathan at all. Olivia Catherine Harrison, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. What exactly aren't you telling me? The moment had arrived, the precipice I'd been approaching for months. I've been seeing someone. His name is Ethan Reeves. He's a photographer, and he's the one who's been offered this opportunity. We're going together. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, a Harrison heirloom that had witnessed generations of family dramas. The photographer from the gala, she finally said, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. Yes. And how long has this dalliance been going on? 6 months, and it's not a dalliance, Mother. I love him. She laughed then, a short, brittle sound entirely devoid of humor. Love. How convenient that you've discovered this emotion with someone who has access to our social circle through his profession. Someone who can elevate his status by association with our family. He doesn't care about any of that, I defended. He doesn't even know about most of it. I haven't told him everything about our family or the business. Then you're being naive as well as foolish, she snapped. Everyone in this town knows who the Harrisons are and what we're worth. Ethan isn't from Newport. He moved here from Chicago just last year. And you believe that's coincidence? Her voice dripped with skepticism. Olivia, men like that target women like you. It's as old as time. That's not what's happening, I insisted, feeling my resolve strengthen in the face of her dismissal. And I'm going with him. I've already submitted my leave of absence at the firm. Mother stood, straightening to her full height, her posture impeccable as always. If you leave with this man, you leave everything behind. Your position at the firm, your role in this family, your inheritance, all of it. Are you threatening to disown me? I asked, disbelief coloring my voice despite having half expected this reaction. I'm stating facts, she replied coldly. The Harrison fortune will not fund some photographer's globe-trotting fantasy or be divided among his inevitable children. Our legacy is about excellence, tradition, and maintaining our position. If you choose to abandon that, you abandon everything that comes with it. I stood as well, suddenly calm in the face of her ultimatum. Then I guess I'll pack my things. Don't be dramatic, Olivia, she sighed. Take some time to reconsider this rash decision. Jonathan is planning a sailing excursion next weekend. Go with him, clear your head, remember who you are and what your responsibilities entail. I know exactly who I am, Mother, I said, moving toward the door. I'm just not sure you ever have. I left her study without looking back, my heart pounding, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, Maxwell emerged from the library, his expression suggesting he'd overheard enough. So, you're running off with the help? He asked, leaning against the banister with the casual confidence of someone who has never questioned their place in the world. He's not the help, Maxwell, I said tiredly. And yes, I'm leaving. A look of genuine confusion crossed his face. But why? You have everything here. The business will be yours someday. No, it won't, I replied. It will be what Mother wants it to be, run how she wants it run, benefiting who she wants it to benefit. Just like every other aspect of my life up until now. And you think some starving artist is a better option? He wasn't being cruel, just genuinely bewildered by my choice. I think being true to myself is a better option, I said, even if that means walking away from all of this. Maxwell studied me for a long moment, then shrugged. Your life, your mistake. But don't come crying when you're living in some dump and eating ramen noodles while watching your Instagram feed fill up with pictures of the life you could have had. I won't, I promised, continuing up the stairs. That night, I packed 2 suitcases, leaving behind designer clothes in favor of practical items for our travels. I took only a few sentimental pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother, who had been the one person in the family to encourage my independence before her death. Everything else, the trappings of Olivia Harrison, socialite and heir, remained. In my closets and drawers, like artifacts of a person who no longer existed. The next morning, I called Ethan. I told her, I said simply when he answered. How did it go? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Exactly as expected. She threatened to cut me off completely. Liv, I never wanted to come between you and your family, he said, his voice tight with worry. If you need to reconsider? I don't, I interrupted. I've never been more certain of anything. When do we leave? 2 days later, I moved my suitcases into Ethan's modest apartment. Mother hadn't spoken another word to me after our confrontation, though I'd left a letter explaining my decision in more detail than our heated exchange had allowed. Maxwell had watched me load my car with an expression caught between pity and relief. With me gone, he would undoubtedly become Mother's primary focus, both the burden and benefit that entailed. Our first destination was a remote village in Alaska, where climate change was forcing an indigenous community to consider relocation after generations on the same land. As our small plane approached the airstrip, I pressed my face to the window, watching the vast wilderness unfold beneath us. Something expanded in my chest, a sensation of freedom and possibility I'd never experienced in Newport's carefully contained world. Ethan reached for my hand across the narrow aisle, his eyes questioning. Any regrets? I thought about the life I'd left behind, the security, the privilege, the predetermined path. And I thought about what lay ahead, the unknown, the challenges, the chance to discover who I truly was beyond the Harrison name. Not one, I answered truthfully. And as the plane touched down on the gravel runway, I felt as though I too was landing on new ground, uncertain but exhilarating, difficult but real. What I couldn't have known then, as we collected our gear and stepped into the crisp Alaskan air, was that Mother would make good on her threat in ways I couldn't have imagined, or that my choice to follow my heart would set in motion events that would test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what truly constitutes a worthwhile inheritance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Life in Alaska was nothing like Newport. Our accommodations were basic. A small cabin on the outskirts of the village with unreliable electricity and plumbing that required a certain finesse. The first night, as I huddled under 3 blankets trying to stay warm, I wondered briefly if I'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then Ethan pulled me close, his warmth more comforting than any luxury Egyptian cotton sheets I'd left behind, and whispered, "Tomorrow, you'll see why we're here." He was right. The next morning, we were welcomed into the community by Elder Sarah, a woman with deep smile lines and eyes that held generations of wisdom. She introduced us to families who had lived on this land for centuries, whose connection to the earth and water ran as deep as their bloodlines. They showed us how rising temperatures were changing their hunting patterns, altering the migration of the wildlife they depended on, and threatening the very ground beneath their homes. As permafrost thawed, "This is our story," Elder Sarah told me as we sat in her kitchen drinking tea made from local herbs. "But who will hear it if no one tells it?" As Ethan documented their daily lives with his camera, I found myself drawn to their stories. I began recording interviews, taking notes, and learning to operate the secondary camera. At night, I would transcribe our recordings, organizing the material while Ethan edited photos. "You're a natural at this," he said one evening, reviewing my work. "You connect with people in a way I've never been able to. They trust you." I hadn't expected that. In Newport, relationships were strategic, not authentic. Trust was a liability, not a strength. Here, my ability to listen, to truly hear people without judgment or agenda, was valued. We stayed in Alaska for 6 weeks before traveling to our next location, a coastal village in Bangladesh fighting a losing battle against rising sea levels. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, from Arctic cold to oppressive heat, from vast open spaces to densely populated communities. Yet the underlying story was the same: people with deep roots in their homeland facing an uncertain future due to forces beyond their control. In Bangladesh, I witnessed resilience that humbled me. Families who had lost everything to cyclones rebuilding with whatever materials they could salvage. Children studying by lamplight, determined to complete their education despite schools damaged by flooding. Community leaders developing innovative adaptation strategies with minimal resources. "How do you keep going?" I asked Farah, a young mother of 3 whose home had been rebuilt 3 times in 5 years. She looked at me with surprise. "What choice is there? This is our home. We adapt. We persist. We continue." Her words stayed with me that night as I lay awake on our simple cot, fan whirring ineffectively against the heat. In Newport, inconvenience was treated as tragedy. A delayed delivery, a scheduling conflict, a less-than-perfect table at a restaurant, all were causes for complaint and compensation. Here, actual tragedy was met with dignity and determination. By our 3rd destination, a drought-stricken community in Ethiopia, I was no longer just assisting Ethan. I was conducting interviews independently, developing my own angles for the story, capturing footage that complemented his still photography. We had become true partners, professionally, as well as personally. 4 months into our journey, my credit card was declined at a supply store in Addis Ababa. I called the company, thinking it was a fraud alert triggered by the international charges. "I'm sorry, Ms. Harrison," the customer service representative said. "This account has been closed at the request of the primary cardholder." "That's impossible," I said. "I am the primary cardholder." After several minutes of verification questions, the truth emerged. The card was linked to a family account controlled by Mother. She had finally made good on her threat. That night, I checked my personal bank accounts to find them nearly empty, with only the last withdrawal I'd made still available. The trust fund I'd had access to since turning 25 showed a balance of 0. Mother had moved swiftly and thoroughly to cut off my financial resources. "We'll figure it out," Ethan said when I told him, his face concerned but not panicked. "The National Geographic grant covers most of our expenses. We can manage." "I know," I said, surprised to find I wasn't as frightened as I should be. "It's not about the money, really. It's the finality of it. She's really done it, cut me off completely." "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked, the question gentle but direct. I considered it honestly. Was I? Did I regret walking away from financial security and family legacy for this uncertain path? "No," I said firmly. "I'm just adjusting to the reality." But Mother's financial maneuvering was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, I received an email from our family attorney, Carlton Davis, a man who had handled Harrison legal affairs since before I was born. Dear Olivia, I regret to inform you that your mother, Diana Harrison, has made significant changes to her will and all associated family trusts. As per my ethical obligation to inform all relevant parties, you should be aware that you have been removed as beneficiary from all Harrison family assets, with all shares in Harrison Investments, real estate holdings, and personal property now designated to your brother, Maxwell, upon your mother's passing. Furthermore, your position as trustee of the Harrison Foundation has been terminated, effective immediately. While I cannot comment on the personal nature of these decisions, I am professionally obligated to ensure you are informed of these changes. Should you wish to discuss the legal implications, my office remains available to you. Sincerely, Carlton Davis, Esq. I read the email 3 times, each reading bringing a different emotion. First shock, then hurt, and finally a strange sense of liberation. Mother had done exactly what she'd threatened, removed me entirely from the Harrison legacy. The last ties binding me to my old life had been severed, not by my choice, but by hers. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, finding me still staring at my phone an hour later. I showed him the email. His face darkened as he read it. "This is extreme. To cut you off completely, just because you chose your own path, your own happiness." "It's not just about my happiness," I explained. "In Mother's world, the family name and legacy are everything. By choosing you, someone outside our social circle, someone who doesn't enhance the Harrison status, I've betrayed generations of careful planning and strategic marriages." "That's medieval," he said, shaking his head. "That's old money," I corrected. "The names and faces change, but the rules remain the same. Blood and breeding matter above all else." "What about love?" he asked. "What about personal fulfillment?" "Luxuries for the middle class," I said with a sad smile. "For families like mine, marriages are mergers, children are heirs, and every decision is weighed against its impact on the family's position and power." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked outside our modest guest house to a small courtyard where the Ethiopian night sky spread above me, stars brighter than I'd ever seen them in light-polluted Newport. Thought about what I'd lost: financial security, family connection, my place in a world I'd known all my life. And I thought about what I'd gained: authentic relationships, meaningful work, the freedom to discover who I truly was beyond the Harrison name and expectations. I sent one email before returning to bed, a brief note to Carlton Davis. "Mr. Davis, thank you for informing me of these changes. While I'm saddened by my mother's decision, I respect her right to distribute her assets as she sees fit. Please know that despite this development, I remain open to reconciliation should she ever reconsider our relationship. Regards, Olivia." Harrison, I added my new email address, no longer the Harrison Investments account I'd used for years, and pressed send. It felt important somehow to respond with dignity, to not allow Mother's rejection to provoke the emotional outburst she might have expected. Life continued. We traveled to Peru, then Indonesia, documenting communities adapting to environmental changes with creativity and determination. I learned to live with less, to find joy in experiences rather than possessions, to measure wealth in connections rather than currency. By the time we reached our final destination, a small island nation in the South Pacific that was already planning its entire population's relocation due to rising sea levels, I barely recognized the woman I had been a year earlier. My hair was lighter from the sun, my skin tanned despite diligent use of sunscreen. My hands, once manicured to perfection, now bore calluses from carrying equipment and helping with community projects in each location we visited. The physical changes were superficial compared to the internal transformation. I had discovered a confidence that came from capability rather than status. I had learned to value directness over diplomacy, authenticity over appearance. I had found purpose in amplifying the voices of people facing challenges with courage and ingenuity, and I had fallen more deeply in love with Ethan, whose passion for his work, compassion for others, and unwavering support for me had created a foundation stronger than any inheritance could provide. In the South Pacific, on a beach with impossibly blue water lapping at the shore, Ethan proposed. No diamond ring. We both knew such extravagance wasn't needed. Just a simple band of local wood he'd commissioned from an island artisan. "I know this isn't what you grew up expecting," he said, the ring balanced on his palm. "It's not platinum or diamonds. It won't impress anyone at a country club." "It's perfect," I said, meaning it completely. "And so are you." We married there on the island, with the community we'd been living among as our witnesses. The island. Chief performed the ceremony, blending their traditions with elements I treasured from my own culture. I wore a simple white dress purchased at a local market, my hair adorned with tropical flowers instead of my grandmother's pearl hairpins. No engraved invitations had been sent, no elaborate floral arrangements ordered, no 5-course meal served on fine china. Instead, the community prepared a feast of local specialties, music was played on traditional instruments, and dancing continued well into the night beneath strings of simple lights and the vast canopy of stars. It was nothing like the wedding Mother would have planned for me and Jonathan Whitmore. No society photographer for Newport Life magazine, no string quartet, no champagne flown in from France. And yet it was more meaningful, more joyful, more authentic than any celebration I could have imagined in my previous life. "Mrs. Reeves," Ethan whispered as we danced together, the ocean breeze cooling our skin. "That sounds strange," I admitted. "But good strange." "Having second thoughts about giving up Harrison?" he teased. "Not even for a second," I assured him. "This is who I'm meant to be." As our year-long project concluded, we faced the question of what came next. The documentation had been successful beyond National Geographic's expectations. Ethan's photographs were being featured in a traveling exhibition, and my written narratives, which had begun as simple supporting material, had evolved into a powerful component of the project. We had opportunities to continue similar work, offers from other publications and organizations impressed with our collaborative approach, but we also had to decide where to call home. Returning to Newport was out of the question. Ethan's small apartment above his studio had been sublet during our absence. We were, in essence, homeless, a concept that would have horrified my former self but now seemed like an opportunity rather than a crisis. "What if we try something completely different?" I suggested one night as we discussed our options. "What if we use what we've learned this year to create something new?" The idea had been forming in my mind for months, shaped by the remarkable people we'd met and the innovative approaches they'd developed to address environmental challenges. What if we could connect these communities, help them share solutions, and bring resources to support their efforts? Ethan listened as I outlined my vision. A nonprofit organization that would document environmental adaptation strategies in vulnerable communities, create a platform for knowledge sharing, and channel funding to grassroots initiatives. We would continue our documentary work, but with a more focused purpose, not just telling stories, but catalyzing action. "It's brilliant," he said when I finished. "And it's absolutely what we should do." "But we have no startup capital," I pointed out. "No connections to major donors. None of the advantages I would have had through the Harrison Foundation." "We have something better," he countered. "Authentic relationships with communities around the world, documented evidence of effective strategies, and a compelling narrative that can inspire others to get involved." His confidence bolstered mine. We spent the flight back to the United States refining the concept, drafting mission statements, and listing potential partners and supporters. By the time we landed in New York, Adaptation Alliance existed as a detailed plan, if not yet a legal entity. We rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, far from the manicured lawns and colonial mansions of Newport. I found work with an environmental nonprofit, using my business background in a setting that aligned with my values. Ethan continued his photography, now with a growing reputation from the National Geographic Project. Evenings and weekends were devoted to building Adaptation Alliance from concept to reality. 6 months after our return, we received our 501c3 status. A small grant from an environmental foundation provided initial funding. The networks we'd built during our year of travel yielded partnerships with community organizations in each location we'd visited. We launched a simple website featuring Ethan's photographs and my narratives, along with practical information about adaptation strategies being implemented in different regions. The work was challenging in ways my position at Harrison Investments never had been. Each decision had real consequences for communities we cared about. Each dollar needed to stretch further than seemed possible. Each day brought new problems to solve with limited resources. But it was also deeply fulfilling. When a coastal village in Bangladesh successfully implemented a floating garden technique they'd learned from our knowledge-sharing platform, increasing food security for 30 families, I felt a sense of accomplishment that no investment portfolio had ever provided. When a community in Alaska secured funding through a connection made at one of our events, allowing them to relocate critical infrastructure to higher ground, the victory belonged to all of us. 1 year after establishing Adaptation Alliance, we hosted our first conference in New York, bringing together representatives from each community in our network, along with researchers, funders, and policymakers. The event exceeded our expectations, generating media coverage, new partnerships, and funding commitments that would sustain our work for the coming year. At the closing reception, as I watched people from vastly different backgrounds and geographies engaged in animated conversations, sharing ideas and contact information, I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me, are you Olivia Reeves, the founder of Adaptation Alliance?" I turned to find a woman in her early 60s, elegantly dressed but not ostentatiously so, with intelligent eyes and a purposeful demeanor. "Yes, I am," I confirmed, extending my hand. "Margaret Wellington," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "I'm with the Wellington Foundation. We're very impressed with what you've built here." The Wellington Foundation was a major player in environmental philanthropy, with resources that could transform our organization's capacity. I tried to maintain my composure as I thanked her for attending. "Your approach is unique," she continued, "connecting communities facing similar challenges, centering local knowledge, building horizontal rather than vertical relationships. It's refreshing in a field that too often imposes solutions from the top down." "That philosophy comes directly from our experiences in these communities," I explained. "They don't need outsiders telling them what to do. They need resources, connections, and platforms to share what they already know works." Margaret nodded approvingly. "The Wellington Foundation would like to discuss a significant multi-year grant to expand your work. Perhaps we could meet next week to explore the possibilities?" As we scheduled the meeting, I felt a wave of vindication wash over me. The path I'd chosen, the one that had cost me my inheritance, my family connections, my place in Newport society, was being validated, not despite my rejection of those advantages, but because of it. The perspective I'd gained by stepping outside, the privileged bubble of my upbringing had enabled me to create something meaningful in a way that never would have been possible had I remained Olivia Harrison, dutiful daughter and heir. Later that evening, as Ethan and I celebrated the success of the conference and the potential Wellington Foundation partnership, my phone lit up with a notification. An email from Carlton Davis, the family attorney I hadn't heard from since the brief exchange after Mother had changed her will. My hand hesitated over the screen. What new severance from my past life could this message contain? Was there anything left to take away? "Whatever it is, Ethan said, noticing my hesitation. We'll handle it together. I nodded and opened the email. Dear Olivia, I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing to inform you that your brother, Maxwell, has reached out to me expressing a desire to connect with you. He has asked me to share his personal contact information and to convey that he would welcome communication from you at your convenience. While I cannot speak to the personal circumstances between you and your family, I wanted to pass along this information as requested. Regards, Carlton Davis, Esquire. Below was Maxwell's personal email address and phone number, not his Harrison Investments contact information, but his private accounts. I stared at the screen, conflicting emotions swirling through me. Maxwell had been a bystander in the conflict between mother and me, neither defending nor condemning me. He had inherited everything I had lost, becoming the sole heir to the Harrison, fortune and legacy. And now, after nearly 2 years of silence, he wanted to connect. Max wants to talk to me, I told Ethan, still processing this unexpected development. Are you going to contact him? He asked, his tone careful and supportive. I considered the question. Part of me wanted to ignore the overture, to maintain the clean break from my past life. Another part longed for some connection to the family I'd grown up with despite everything that had happened. I think I will, I decided. Not to go backward, but to see if there's a way forward. On my terms this time. As I drafted a brief response to Maxwell, agreeing to a phone call the following week, I realized that the journey I'd begun when I walked away from Newport had brought me to a place of strength I couldn't have imagined. I no longer needed the Harrison name or fortune to define me. I had built something meaningful on my own terms, with a partner who valued me for who I truly was. Whatever Maxwell wanted, reconciliation, information, or something else entirely, I could engage with him now as an equal, not as the compliant daughter and sister I'd once been. My identity was no longer shaped by mother's expectations or society's constraints, but by the choices I'd made and the life I'd created for myself. As I pressed send on the email to Maxwell, I felt a sense of closure beginning to form. The circle that had begun when mother changed her will, disinheriting me for marrying the wrong guy, was not ending, but transforming into something new, a spiral of growth that had already taken me further than the straight path of inheritance ever could have. The inheritance I'd lost had been replaced by something far more valuable. The discovery of my own strength, purpose, and authentic voice. And that was a legacy no one could ever take away. The Brooklyn cafe Maxwell chose for our meeting was nothing like the refined establishments of Newport. No white tablecloths or silverware polished to a mirror shine. No sommelier hovering nearby, or waitstaff trained to be invisible until needed. Just mismatched furniture, locally sourced coffee, and the gentle hum of creative professionals working on laptops. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained since childhood. Mother had considered tardiness the ultimate demonstration of disrespect, and even now, living a life that rejected so many of her principles, I couldn't bring myself to be late. I selected a table near the back, positioned so I could see the door. Another habit, always be aware of your surroundings and who might be observing you. At precisely 1 o'clock, Maxwell entered. He looked different somehow, less polished than I remembered. His hair was slightly longer, his suit well-tailored, but not from the British bespoke tailor father had patronized for decades. He scanned the room, and I raised my hand slightly. When our eyes met, I saw something unexpected. Nervousness. "Liv," he said as he approached, using the childhood nickname he'd abandoned when we entered our teens, and formality began to eclipse familiarity in our household. "Max?" I replied, standing to greet him. We hesitated, both uncertain of the protocol for this reunion. In Newport, air kisses would have been the norm, regardless of the emotional temperature between participants. Here, in this neutral territory we'd chosen, those social scripts didn't apply. Finally, Max stepped forward and embraced me. A real hug, not the perfunctory touch of shoulders our family typically exchanged at Christmas and Easter. I stiffened momentarily, then returned the gesture. He smelled of the same cologne he'd worn since college, a detail that triggered an unexpected wave of nostalgia. You look... He searched for the right word. Different. But good different. You too, I said, meaning it. There was something less rigid about him, a subtle softening around the edges. We sat down, ordered coffee, and navigated the awkward small talk that precedes meaningful conversation after long separation. He asked about Ethan, about our work with Adaptation Alliance, about our travels, all information he could have gleaned from our website or social media. I asked about Newport, about his role at Harrison Investments, about mutual acquaintances. All subjects that felt like discussing a foreign country I'd once visited. Finally, after our coffee had grown cold and the preliminaries exhausted, Maxwell set down his cup with deliberate care. I should have reached out sooner, he said, his gaze direct. After Mother changed the will, I should have called you. Why didn't you? I asked, the question simple but loaded with 2 years of silence. Maxwell sighed. Honestly? At first I thought Mother would calm down, that it was a temporary reaction. By the time I realized she was serious, months had passed, and I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound. Self-serving? I suggested, given that you inherited everything I lost? He flinched but nodded. Yes, exactly that. And then, more time passed and it became harder to make that first contact. So, why now? I asked. What's changed? Maxwell hesitated, and I noticed a slight tremor in his hands as he pushed his coffee cup aside. I'm getting married, he said. Congratulations, I replied automatically, wondering if this was his reason for reconnecting, to invite me to a wedding Mother would surely forbid my attendance at. Anyone I know? David Mercer, he said quietly. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. David, your college roommate? The one who works for that tech company in California? Maxwell nodded, his expression a mixture of apprehension and resolve. We've been together for 3 years. Secretly, of course. Mother doesn't know yet. Understanding dawned with dizzying clarity. Maxwell, the perfect son, the compliant heir, the one who had seemingly embraced every aspect of the life I'd rejected, had been living with a secret that would devastate Mother as thoroughly as my choice had. Max, I breathed, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. I had no idea. No one does, except David's family. They've been incredibly supportive. He squeezed my hand. Which is more than I can say for what I've been for you. The confession transformed our meeting from polite reconnection to profound revelation. Maxwell spoke openly for perhaps the first time in our adult relationship, describing the careful compartmentalization of his life, the perfect Harrison heir in Newport, and the authentic self he became whenever he could escape to San Francisco where David lived. After you left, he explained, Mother transferred all her expectations and control to me. I became the repository for every Harrison ambition, every social obligation, every demand for perfection. And I was too much of a coward to follow your example. It wasn't courage, I said. It was desperation. I couldn't breathe in that life anymore. I know that feeling, he admitted. Every time I return from visiting David, it's like putting on a suit that's too tight. I'm suffocating by inches. So why stay? I asked, though I knew the answer from my own journey. Fear, he said simply. Fear of losing everything. Fear of Mother's rejection. Fear of disappointing Father's memory. Fear of stepping into the unknown without the Harrison safety net. The same fears I had, I acknowledged. But Max, the freedom on the other side is worth it. I won't pretend it's been easy, but I've never regretted my choice. He studied me, as if trying to measure the truth of my words against his own terrors. Tell me honestly, what's it like? Building a life without the Harrison name opening doors? Without the money smoothing every path? I considered his question carefully, wanting to offer truth rather than platitudes. It's harder in ways I never anticipated. Simple things become complicated when you can't throw money at problems. Connections have to be earned rather than presumed. Respect comes from your work, not your last name. Maxwell nodded, looking both frightened and fascinated. But, I continued, it's also more genuine than anything I experienced in Newport. Every accomplishment is truly mine. Every relationship is based on who I am, not what I represent. And there's a freedom in that authenticity that's worth every struggle. David wants me to move to San Francisco, Maxwell said after a moment, to stop living separate lives, to be open about our relationship. And what do you want? I asked. His eyes, so like mine, met my gaze directly. I want what you have. Not the specific circumstances, but the congruence between who you are and how you live. I'm tired of the division, tired of being half alive. Then you know what you need to do, I said gently. Maxwell nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Mother will cut me off just as she did you. Everything will go to cousins or charities. The Harrison legacy will end with our generation. Does that matter to you? I asked. Truly matter, I mean. Not in the abstract way we were raised to think about legacy, but in concrete terms of your happiness? He considered this, turning, his empty coffee cup in slow circles on the table. I've been asking myself that question ever since I decided to contact you. The answer keeps changing. That's because it's complex, I acknowledged. We were taught to see the Harrison name as our primary identity. Separating yourself from that takes time. How did you do it? He asked, leaning forward intently. How did you find the courage? I smiled. I had something I wanted more than Mother's approval or the Harrison fortune. What I felt for Ethan, the person I could be with him, it outweighed everything else. And now, with your nonprofit and all you've built? Now I understand that what I've created has more value than what I inherited, I said. The Harrison assets were just that. Assets. Things passed down, not earned or created. What Ethan and I have built together has meaning because we've shaped it with our own values and vision. Maxwell fell silent, absorbing my words. Finally, he looked up with newfound determination. I want you to meet David. He's actually in New York this week for business. That's why I suggested meeting now. I'd like that, I said sincerely. And, he added hesitantly, I was hoping you might help me. When I tell Mother, not be there physically, that would make it worse, but help me prepare. You're the only person who's survived her worst reaction and come out stronger. The request surprised me. After 2 years of silence, Maxwell wasn't just seeking reconciliation, but actual guidance. He saw strength in my choices rather than the betrayal Mother had labeled them. Of course, I said. Though I'm not sure I'm the best example of how to handle it gracefully. You're the only example I have, he replied simply. We made plans to meet again that weekend, with David joining us. As we prepared to leave, Maxwell reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. I almost forgot, he said, handing it to me. Another reason I wanted to see you in person. I opened the envelope to find a check, a substantial one, made out to Adaptation Alliance. Max, this is too much, I said, immediately calculating how many community projects this could fund, how many additional staff we could hire. It's from my personal funds, not the family accounts, he clarified quickly. I've been following your work. What you're doing matters, Liv. I want to support it regardless of what happens with Mother. The gesture moved me deeply. It wasn't about the money itself, though that would certainly advance our mission. It was about the recognition, that my brother saw value in the path I'd chosen, even as it diverged completely from the one mapped out for us from birth. "Thank you," I said, carefully returning the check to the envelope. Not just for this, but for reaching out, for being brave enough to bridge the gap. As we exited the cafe together, Maxwell paused on the sidewalk. "Do you ever regret it? Walking away from everything?" I thought about the question, not with the practiced assurance I'd developed for similar inquiries from others, but with genuine self-reflection. Did I ever miss the security, the luxury, the effortless social navigation that came with being a Harrison? There are moments, I admitted. Usually small ones, when I'm negotiating with a difficult grant provider, or when our apartment's heating fails in February, or when I see an old Newport acquaintance featured in a magazine at some gala I would have attended. But they're fleeting. They're not regrets, just acknowledgments of the trade-offs. Maxwell nodded, understanding. "And they're outweighed by what you've gained." "Immeasurably," I confirmed. "I lost an inheritance, Max, but I found my purpose. There's no comparison in value." We parted with another embrace, this one less tentative than the first. As I watched him walk away, his shoulders straighter than when he'd arrived, I felt a sense of closure begin to form. Not the bitter kind I'd expected if I ever reconnected with my family, but something healing and hopeful. The weekend dinner with Maxwell and David proved revelatory. David was nothing like what Mother would have chosen for her son. He was brilliant, but unpretentious, successful but not status-obsessed, confident but kind. I immediately understood what Maxwell saw in him, a path to authenticity, much as Ethan had been for me. Ethan and David connected over their shared experiences as outsiders to the rarefied world of old money, swapping humorous observations about the peculiar social codes neither of them had been born understanding. Maxwell, watching them, seemed both anxious and envious of their easy self-acceptance. "When are you planning to tell Mother?" I asked as we lingered over dessert in our modest apartment. "After the Wellington Foundation benefit next month," Maxwell replied. "She's co-chairing it with Eliza Whitmore. I don't want to disrupt that for her. It's important to her social standing." I nodded, acknowledging the consideration while also recognizing the delay tactic. "And then?" "Then I tell her everything," he said, reaching for David's hand across the table. "About us. About our plans to live together openly in San Francisco. About the life I actually want versus the one she's planned. Be prepared for her to react exactly as she did with me," I warned gently. "The disinheritance, the social exile, the complete severance." "I know," Maxwell said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I've been living on borrowed time in her good graces. Authenticity has a price in our family. But it's worth it," David added softly, squeezing Maxwell's hand. "You're worth it." The evening ended with promises to stay connected, regardless of what happened with Mother. As they left, I felt a bittersweet happiness for my brother. Joy that he'd found someone who valued him for himself. Sadness for the painful rupture I knew lay ahead for him. "He'll be okay," Ethan said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "He has you as a roadmap now." "I just hope he's prepared for how difficult Mother can be," I said. "She'll see this as a double betrayal. First me, now him." "Or maybe it will be her wake-up call," Ethan suggested. "Sometimes losing everything is what people need to reevaluate their priorities." I considered this, though experience with Mother made me skeptical. Diana Harrison was not a woman who reconsidered her positions or admitted error. Her worldview was as fixed as the North Star, with the Harrison legacy at its center. Maxwell's revelation would shake that foundation, even more profoundly than my departure had. The Wellington Foundation benefit was a major event in the environmental philanthropy world, bringing together old money, new tech wealth, and nonprofit leaders in a rare confluence of interests. Adaptation Alliance had been invited to participate, not because of my Harrison connections, which remained severed, but because of our growing reputation for innovative work. The event was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, an appropriately grand setting for the substantial fundraising goals. As Ethan and I arrived, I felt a momentary disorientation. This world of high society galas had once been my natural habitat, but now I entered it as an outsider, representing a small nonprofit rather than a dynastic fortune. "Nervous?" Ethan asked as we checked our coats. "Not nervous," I clarified. "Just recalibrating." The last time I attended something like this, I was Olivia Harrison, heiress and board member. Now I'm here on the merits of our work. "Which makes you belong here more legitimately than ever before," he pointed out. The observation bolstered my confidence as we entered the grand hall. The space was transformed for the evening, with tasteful decorations emphasizing environmental themes. Wealthy donors circulated among nonprofit representatives, corporate sponsors displayed. Their green initiatives and silent auction items promised exclusive experiences to the highest bidders. I navigated the room with practiced ease, introducing Ethan and discussing Adaptation Alliance with interested parties. The skills honed at countless Newport events served me well, though now deployed for a purpose I genuinely believed in rather than social positioning. Several times, I noticed familiar faces from my previous life, former associates of Mother's, members of clubs the Harrisons had belonged to for generations. Some nodded politely, others pretended not to see me. An hour into the event, as I was explaining our community-centered approach to a potential donor, I felt a shift in the room's energy. Turning slightly, I saw Mother entering with her typical perfect timing. Not too early to seem eager, not too late to seem dismissive. She wore midnight blue, her signature color for important occasions, with the Harrison sapphires at her throat and wrists. Maxwell followed just behind her, impeccably dressed as always, but with a tension visible in his posture that only someone who knew him well would notice. Our eyes met briefly across the room, and I gave him a subtle nod of encouragement. For a moment, I considered avoiding Mother entirely. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years, and this public setting hardly seemed appropriate for any kind of meaningful interaction. But as I watched her work the room with practiced charm, something settled within me. I was no longer the daughter desperate for her approval. I was a professional in my own right, representing an organization I'd helped build from nothing. "I should introduce myself to Diana Harrison," I told Ethan. "She's a major influence in philanthropic circles, and Adaptation Alliance could benefit from her awareness of our work, regardless of our personal history." Ethan raised an eyebrow, but nodded his support. "I'll be right here if you need backup." I made my way across the room, timing my approach for a moment when Mother had just finished a conversation and hadn't yet engaged another guest. Maxwell, seeing my trajectory, moved slightly aside, his expression a mixture of anxiety and hope. "Mother," I said as I reached her, my voice calm and professional. "Good evening." She turned, her composure faltering only for a fraction of a second before her social mask locked back into place. "Olivia," she acknowledged, her tone neutral. "I wasn't aware you would be attending." Adaptation Alliance was invited to participate, I explained. "We've been doing work that aligns with the Wellington Foundation's priorities." A slight tightening around her eyes was the only indication that the name of my organization registered with her. "I see. How enterprising of you." "It's been rewarding work," I said simply. "We've been able to make meaningful differences in several communities facing environmental challenges." "Yes, Maxwell mentioned something about your project," she said, managing to imbue the word with subtle dismissal, though I understood it to be quite small in scale. "We're growing," I replied evenly. "In fact, the Wellington Foundation is considering a significant grant to expand our programs. Something flickered across her perfectly composed features. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant recognition that my work had gained legitimacy beyond what she'd anticipated. "Well," she said after a moment, "I suppose one must occupy oneself with something." Before I could respond to this backhanded acknowledgement, Maxwell stepped forward. "Liv's organization is doing groundbreaking work, Mother. Their approach to community empowerment is being recognized throughout the sector." Mother's gaze shifted between us, clearly unsettled by Maxwell's defense of me. "You seem unusually well informed about your sister's activities," she observed, a new wariness entering her expression. "We've reconnected recently," Maxwell stated, his voice steady despite the slight pallor that had crept into his face. "I've been learning about her work and her life." The implication that Maxwell had defied her unspoken ban on contact with me registered immediately. Mother's hand tightened on her champagne flute, though her social smile remained fixed. "How interesting that you didn't mention this," she said, her tone dropping several degrees. "I've been meaning to discuss several things with you, Mother," Maxwell replied, meeting her gaze directly. "Perhaps after the benefit, when we have proper privacy." I recognized the courage this simple statement required from him, a small assertion of independence that presaged the larger revelation to come. Rather than leaving him exposed in this moment of vulnerability, I decided to change the subject. "The Wellington Foundation has done a remarkable job with the event," I commented smoothly. "I understand you co-chaired the planning committee." The diversion worked. Mother shifted into her role as social leader, describing the decisions behind various aspects of the evening while subtly emphasizing her central role in its execution. Maxwell shot me a grateful glance as she elaborated on the challenges of coordinating with the museum staff. After a few minutes of this safer conversation, I noticed Margaret Wellington approaching our group. "If you'll excuse me," I said, "I need to speak with Margaret about our upcoming proposal. It was interesting to see you again, Mother." I moved away before she could respond, but not before noticing the calculating look she directed at Maxwell. My brief interaction with her had confirmed what I already knew. Reconciliation was not a possibility. She viewed my new life not as a valid choice, but as a curious diversion until reality forced me back to the fold. The fact that reality had done no such thing, that I'd instead built something meaningful outside her sphere of influence, was something she couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. As the evening progressed, I maintained a professional focus on representing Adaptation Alliance, while keeping a discreet eye on Maxwell. He performed his duties as Mother's son perfectly, but I noticed him checking his phone frequently, presumably communicating with David, who was waiting elsewhere for their post-event meeting. The benefit concluded successfully, with the Wellington Foundation announcing record donations for environmental initiatives. As guests began departing, I found Maxwell near the coat check. "Are you still going through with it tonight?" I asked quietly. He nodded, his expression a mixture of dread and resolve. "David's waiting at my apartment. Mother expects me to escort her home and review the evening's outcomes, as we always do after these events. I've told her I need to discuss something important with her." "Remember what we talked about," I said, gripping his arm supportively. "Be clear, be direct, and be prepared for her to lash out. This isn't about her or her feelings. It's about your life and your right to live it authentically." "I know," he said, his voice stronger than I'd expected. "Seeing you tonight, how you've built something meaningful despite everything you lost, it helps Liv, more than you know." We embraced briefly, drawing curious glances from nearby guests unaccustomed to such displays of affection at formal events. "Call me afterward, whatever happens," I urged. "Ethan and I will be home all evening." As Maxwell went to collect Mother for their departure, Ethan joined me. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensitive to the emotional undercurrents. "Maxwell's telling her tonight," I explained quietly. About David, about their plans to live openly together in San Francisco. Ethan whistled softly. Brave man. From what you've told me about your mother, that won't go over well. No, I agreed, watching as Maxwell escorted Mother toward the exit, her hand resting formally on his arm, unaware that within hours their relationship would fundamentally change. But he's ready. He's choosing his own path, just as I did. That night, Ethan and I waited in our apartment, attempting to distract ourselves with work, but both aware of the confrontation unfolding across town. Shortly after midnight, my phone rang with Maxwell's number. Max? I answered immediately. How did it go? The silence on the other end lasted long enough to concern me, followed by a ragged exhale. About as expected, he finally said, his voice hoarse. She threatened disinheritance, accused David of manipulating me for the Harrison fortune, suggested I was having some kind of delayed crisis brought on by your abandonment of the family. I'm so sorry, Max, I said, though we had anticipated exactly this reaction. Don't be, he replied, and I was surprised to hear a note of liberation in his voice beneath the strain. It's done. I've said what needed saying for years. I'm staying at David's hotel tonight, and tomorrow we're flying to San Francisco. I've already instructed Carlton to begin the process of transitioning my responsibilities at Harrison Investments. How do you feel? I asked, concerned about the aftermath of such a rupture. Lighter, he said after a moment's reflection. Terrified, but lighter. Like I've been carrying this massive weight for so long that I'd forgotten what it feels like to stand up straight. That feeling gets stronger, I assured him. The fear fades, but the freedom remains. We talked for another hour, about practical matters like his planned move, about emotional considerations like grieving the relationship with Mother, about the new life he was choosing with David. By the time we hung up, I felt confident he would navigate this transition, painful as it was. As I joined Ethan in bed afterward, I thought about the parallel journeys my brother and I had taken, both choosing love and authenticity over inheritance and approval, both discovering that what we gained was worth far more than what we lost. He'll be okay, Ethan said, pulling me close. He has you as proof that there's life after disinheritance, and a pretty amazing life at that. I smiled in the darkness, thinking of all we'd built together. Our relationship, our organization, our community of purpose-driven colleagues and friends. None of it would have been possible had I remained in Newport, following Mother's carefully plotted course for my life. The best inheritance, I murmured, sleep beginning to claim me, is the courage to create your own path. 3 years after, Maxwell's confrontation with Mother Adaptation Alliance had grown beyond anything I could have imagined when Ethan and I first sketched our vision on a flight back to the United States. The Wellington Foundation grant had been transformative, allowing us to expand our team, extend our reach to 12 countries, and develop a digital platform where communities could share indigenous solutions to environmental challenges. Our Brooklyn apartment had evolved into a modest office space with 6 full-time staff, while Ethan and I had moved to a slightly larger place in the same neighborhood. Still nothing like the Newport mansion I'd grown up in, but comfortable and filled with treasures from our travels rather than inherited antiques. Maxwell and David had settled in San Francisco, where Max had reinvented himself professionally, using his financial expertise to support sustainable investment initiatives. True to her word, Mother had cut him off completely, altering her will, once again to leave the Harrison fortune to distant cousins rather than her ungrateful children. The family firm continued under professional management, with neither of us involved in its operations. Despite Mother's rejection, Maxwell seemed happier than I'd ever known him to be. When Ethan and I visited them in California, I barely recognized my formerly uptight brother, now relaxed in casual clothes, laughing openly, and affectionate with David in a way that would have been unthinkable in Newport. You know what's strange? He said during one visit. as we walked along the Pacific coast near their home. I spent most of my life dreading this exact situation, being cut off, losing my position, disappointing mother. It was my worst fear. And now that it's happened, I realize it wasn't worth fearing at all. Because the reality isn't as bad as the anticipation, I suggested. Because what I gained is so much more valuable than what I lost, he corrected. I wasted years protecting an inheritance that was actually holding me hostage. His words resonated deeply. The Harrison fortune had never been just about money. It represented a worldview, a set of expectations, a prescribed path that allowed no deviation. Freedom from that inheritance had been the true gift, though neither of us had seen it that way initially. It was during this period of growth and satisfaction that the unexpected letter arrived. Our office manager, Elena, placed it on my desk, one Monday morning with raised eyebrows. "Special delivery," she said, hand-delivered by a very formal gentleman who looked like he stepped out of a period drama. The envelope was heavy cream stationery with the Harrison family crest embossed in the corner, a sight I hadn't seen in years. My name was written in Carlton Davis's distinctive handwriting, the family attorney who had informed me of my disinheritance years earlier. I stared at it for several minutes after Elena left, debating whether to open it immediately or wait until after work when Ethan would be home. Curiosity won out. Inside was a brief note from Carlton requesting a meeting at his Manhattan office at my earliest convenience regarding a matter of significant importance concerning Harrison family affairs. No further explanation was provided, which was typical of Carlton's discreet approach to sensitive matters. I called his office immediately and scheduled an appointment for the following day, then phoned Maxwell. "I got one too," he confirmed, before I could even explain. Same vague wording, same request for an in-person meeting. "Do you think Mother is ill?" I asked, the most logical explanation for simultaneous outreach to both disinherited children. "It's possible," Maxwell said, though she seemed perfectly healthy at the Wellington benefit last month. "You saw her?" This was news to me. Maxwell hadn't mentioned any contact with Mother since their confrontation. From a distance, we didn't speak. She was with the Whitmore crowd as usual, looking exactly the same, commanding the room without appearing to try. We speculated about various possibilities. Perhaps she was selling the Newport house. Maybe there was some legal issue requiring our signatures despite our disinheritance. Or possibly even a distant relative had passed away, leaving something directly to us that bypassed Mother's control. "Will you fly in for the meeting?" I asked Maxwell. "Already booked a red-eye. I arrive tomorrow morning. Carlton scheduled me for 2 p.m. "I'm at 11 a.m., I told him. "Let's meet after for lunch. Compare notes." Agreed. This is too strange to handle separately. The next day, I entered the imposing offices of Davis, Whitney, and Pearson, a law firm that had served New England's elite families for generations. The reception area hadn't changed since my childhood visits with Father. Same leather chairs, same oil paintings of naval scenes, same hushed atmosphere of moneyed discretion. "Ms. Harrison," the receptionist greeted me, catching herself immediately. "I apologize, Mrs. Reeves. Mr. Davis is expecting you." The correction surprised me. In the past, the firm's staff had been meticulously briefed on client details. The TICOM small slip suggested something unusual in the circumstances of this meeting. Carlton's office was exactly as I remembered. Bookshelves lined with leather-bound legal volumes, a massive mahogany desk, windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The man himself had aged since I'd last seen him, his hair now completely white, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his posture remained impeccable as he rose to greet me. "Olivia," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Your message was intriguing," I replied, taking the offered seat across from his desk. "Is my mother ill, Carlton?" He settled back into his chair, adjusting his reading glasses with practiced precision. Your mother is in excellent health, physically speaking. Her circumstances, however, have changed significantly. What circumstances? I asked, intrigued by his careful phrasing. Carlton folded his hands on the desk, adopting the measured tone he used for delivering complex legal information. 3 weeks ago, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened an investigation into certain practices at Harrison Investments, specifically focusing on transactions dating back approximately 10 years. This was not at all what I had expected. What kind of transactions? The details are complex and still emerging, he said diplomatically, but the preliminary findings suggest irregularities in how certain client funds were allocated and reported. The investigation has expanded to include potential tax evasion and misrepresentation to shareholders. I sat back, processing this information. Harrison Investments had always prided itself on impeccable compliance and conservative investment strategies. Father had been almost obsessive about maintaining the firm's sterling reputation. These transactions, I said slowly, they occurred after my father's death? Carlton nodded. The earliest date identified so far is approximately 8 months after your father's passing, when your mother assumed control of the firm's executive decisions. The implication hung in the air between us. Mother, not father, was responsible for whatever irregularities had attracted federal attention. How serious is this? I asked. Potentially very serious, Carlton acknowledged. Criminal charges are possible, though we are working diligently to cooperate with investigators and mitigate the situation. And where do I come into this? I haven't been involved with Harrison Investments for years. Carlton removed his glasses, a gesture I recognized from childhood as preceding particularly significant information. The SEC investigation has triggered certain provisions in your father's original estate plan, provisions that supersede subsequent changes made by your mother. I leaned forward, suddenly alert. What provisions? Your father, with his characteristic foresight, included a clause that would activate in the event of certain contingencies, including federal investigations into the firm's practices. This clause stipulates that control of specific Harrison assets, including the Newport property and several investment portfolios segregated from the main business, would transfer immediately to his children, removing them from potential risk associated with the company's legal challenges. But Mother changed her will, I pointed out. Maxwell and I were both disinherited. She changed her will, yes, Carlton confirmed. But she couldn't alter certain irrevocable trusts your father established before his death. The contingency clause exists within those trusts, beyond her control. The implications slowly dawned on me. So you're saying that because of this investigation, Maxwell and I inherit these protected assets regardless of Mother's wishes? That is precisely what I'm saying, Carlton confirmed. As of last week, you and your brother have each inherited approximately 1/3 of your father's original estate, specifically the portions he placed in protected trusts anticipating potential business complications. I sat in stunned silence, trying to absorb this unexpected reversal. After years of building a life independent of the Harrison fortune, after finding identity and purpose beyond the family name, I was suddenly heir to substantial wealth once again. The Newport house? I asked, thinking of the childhood home I'd left behind. Falls under the protected assets, Carlton confirmed. It transfers to you and Maxwell jointly, along with the art collection, the family silver, and other personal property your father specifically designated. And Mother? I couldn't help asking. What happens to her? Carlton's professional facade slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern. She retains approximately 1/3 of the original estate, also protected by your father's foresight. However, her control of Harrison Investments is now in jeopardy. The board has requested her temporary removal as chairperson pending the investigation's outcome. A complex mixture of emotions washed through me: sympathy for Mother's professional, humiliation, vindication that Father had apparently harbored concerns about her business judgment, and uncertainty about what this unexpected inheritance meant for the life I'd built with Ethan. "I need time to process this," I said finally. "Of course," Carlton nodded. "There's no immediate action required from you, though eventually you and Maxwell will need to decide how to manage the joint properties." He handed me a thick folder containing documents detailing the assets in question, their current valuations, and the legal mechanisms of their transfer. As I stood to leave, a final question occurred to me. Does Mother know about this meeting? About the inheritance reverting to us? Carlton's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She was informed. Yesterday. She did not take the news well. I could only imagine. For Mother, losing control would be more devastating than losing the assets themselves. Her careful rewriting of Father's intentions, removing her disobedient children from the Harrison legacy, had been undone by his posthumous foresight. "Is she still living in the Newport house?" I asked. "Yes," Carlton confirmed. "Though technically, as of last week, she is doing so at your and Maxwell's discretion." This final revelation, that Mother was now effectively our tenant in the home she had dominated for decades, seemed almost too ironic to comprehend. I thanked Carlton and left with the heavy folder under my arm, my thoughts racing. Maxwell was waiting at a cafe near the law office, having arrived early for his own appointment. When he saw my expression, he immediately signaled the waiter for coffee. "That bad?" he asked as I slid into the seat across from him. "Not bad," I said slowly. "Just completely unexpected." I briefed him on the conversation with Carlton, watching his expressions shift from shock to disbelief to cautious excitement. "Father protected us," he said when I finished, "even from Mother, if necessary." "It appears so," I agreed, which suggests he had concerns about her business approach even before he died. Maxwell nodded thoughtfully. He never said anything explicitly, but I remember tensions between them over certain investment strategies. Father was always conservative, risk-averse. Mother pushed for more aggressive growth after she became more involved in the firm. The waiter brought our coffee, and we fell silent until he departed. The public setting suddenly seemed inappropriate for discussing family financial matters, an old habit from our Newport upbringing that apparently lingered despite everything. "So what now?" Maxwell asked, stirring his coffee absently. "We're suddenly wealthy again. Do we go back to being Harrisons?" "I don't think we ever stopped being Harrisons," I reflected. "We just redefined what that means on our own terms." "But the money changes things," he pressed, "doesn't it?" I considered his question seriously. Did it change things? 3 years of building a life based on my own merits rather than inherited privilege had transformed my relationship with wealth. I no longer saw it as an identity or a security blanket, but as a tool, one that could be deployed thoughtfully or destructively. "It changes our options," I said finally, "but it doesn't have to change who we've become or what we value." Maxwell nodded slowly. "I don't want to go back," he admitted. "Not to Newport, not to that life. I'm proud of what I've built in San Francisco, of who I am with David." "Then don't go back," I said simply. "This inheritance doesn't have to be a return to the past. It can be a resource for the future we choose." Over the next 2 hours, our conversation evolved from shock to practical considerations. What would we do with the Newport house? How should we approach Mother given these changed circumstances? How could we use these resources responsibly without allowing them to derail the authentic lives we'd built? By the time Maxwell left for his official meeting with Carlton, we had outlined a tentative plan. We would maintain our current lives and work, using portions of the inheritance to expand our respective missions. Adaptation Alliance for me, sustainable investment initiatives for Maxwell. We would keep the Newport house for now, allowing Mother to continue living there while we determined its long-term future. Most importantly, we would approach this unexpected wealth as stewards rather than owners, considering how it could serve purposes beyond personal comfort or status. That evening, I shared everything with Ethan, waiting anxiously for his reaction. We had built our relationship and our work without the cushion of family money, finding strength in that independence. Would this sudden reversal of fortune change the dynamic between us? "So," he said after I finished explaining, "you're rich again." "We're rich," I corrected. "Whatever affects me affects you." He smiled, reaching for my hand across our small dining table. "I didn't marry you for your potential inheritance prospects." "I know that," I said, squeezing his fingers. "But this changes our circumstances significantly. We need to decide together how to handle it." Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful rather than excited or concerned. "The way I see it, nothing fundamental has changed. We're still the same people with the same values and the same mission. This just gives us more resources to advance that mission." His perspective echoed my own evolving thoughts. The inheritance wasn't a return to my former identity, but an additional tool for the life we were already building. "What about the Newport house?" he asked. "Your childhood home, now partly yours again." "That's more than just money. It's history, memories." I hadn't fully processed that aspect yet. The house represented so much: privilege and restriction, comfort and confinement, family legacy and family control. The thought of returning there, even as an owner rather than a daughter under Mother's rule, evoked complicated emotions. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants nothing to do with it, too many memories of feeling trapped there. But another part recognizes its value, not just financially but historically." "You don't have to decide immediately," Ethan reminded me. "It's not going anywhere." We stayed up late into the night, discussing possibilities that had seemed unimaginable just days earlier: expanding Adaptation Alliance's community grant program, creating a fellowship for young environmental journalists to document climate adaptation strategies, perhaps even establishing a retreat center where Indigenous knowledge holders could share traditional ecological practices with scientists and policymakers. The inheritance, viewed through the lens of our shared values, transformed from a potential return to old constraints into a liberation from current limitations. It wasn't about luxury or status, but about impact and possibility. 2 weeks later, Maxwell flew to New York for a more extensive meeting with Carlton and the financial advisors handling our inherited assets. Afterward, he and David joined Ethan and me for dinner at our apartment. "I spoke with Mother yesterday," Maxwell announced as we settled at the table. "How did that go?" I asked, both concerned and curious. He sighed, accepting the glass of wine David handed him. "About as expected. She's furious about the SEC investigation, convinced it's a witch hunt orchestrated by competitors. She barely acknowledged the inheritance transfer except to call it your father's misguided contingency planning." "Did she mention us moving back to Newport? Taking over the family business?" These were the scenarios I'd been half expecting, half dreading. "No," Maxwell said, surprising me. "She seems to have accepted that we've established our own paths, or perhaps she's simply too preoccupied with the investigation to focus on our choices right now." "Carlton says the case is serious," I noted. "Did he share any more details with you?" Maxwell nodded, his expression somber. "It appears Mother approved several investment strategies that involved misrepresenting certain assets to both clients and regulators. Nothing as dramatic as a Ponzi scheme, but definitely beyond the ethical and legal boundaries Father always maintained." The news saddened rather than shocked me. Mother had always been more concerned with outcomes than methods, with maintaining the appearance of Harrison's success, rather than the integrity that had actually built it. "Will she face criminal charges?" I asked quietly. "It's possible," Maxwell acknowledged, though Carlton believes a significant financial settlement and her permanent removal from financial management roles is more likely. We sat with this information, each processing its implications. Mother, who had defined herself by control and social standing, might lose both. "I've been thinking about the Newport house," Maxwell said after a while, changing the subject. "What if we transformed it into something useful? A retreat center or educational facility aligned with Adaptation Alliance's mission?" The suggestion caught me by surprise. "You wouldn't want to use it yourself? Or sell it?" He shook his head. "David and I have built our home in San Francisco. Newport represents a past life for me. But rather than selling it, which would feel like erasing Father's legacy along with Mother's control, what if we repurposed it? A place where environmental leaders from vulnerable communities could come to rest, strategize, and connect with resources," Ethan elaborated, clearly having discussed this with them previously. The Harrison name becoming associated with forward thinking, adaptation rather than old money preservation. The concept resonated unexpectedly. I had been thinking of the inheritance primarily in financial terms, but the Newport house itself, transformed from a symbol of privilege into a center for environmental justice, offered a different kind of opportunity. A chance to redefine the Harrison legacy in a way that honored Father's values while transcending Mother's limitations. "What about Mother?" I asked practically. "She still lives there." "She could remain in the East Wing," Maxwell suggested. "It's essentially a separate apartment already. The main house and grounds could be converted for the center's purposes." I tried to imagine Mother sharing her domain with environmental activists from developing nations, with indigenous knowledge keepers whose expertise she would never recognize, with people she would normally only encounter as staff rather than guests. The image was almost inconceivable. "I can't see her agreeing to that arrangement," I said diplomatically. "She might not have much choice," David pointed out. "Depending on the outcome of the SEC investigation, her options could be limited." The conversation continued into the night, our vision for the inheritance evolving beyond simple acceptance or rejection. We weren't returning to our past identity as Harrisons, but we weren't denying that heritage either. Instead, we were redefining it, channeling resources once used primarily for status maintenance toward meaningful impact on issues we cared deeply about. By evening's end, Maxwell and I had outlined a framework for managing the inherited assets as partners rather than competitors. Unlike the dynamic Mother had always fostered between us, subtle rivalry for her approval, and greater shares of the Harrison legacy, our approach emphasized collaboration and complementary strengths. As they prepared to leave, Maxwell embraced me with genuine warmth. "Can you imagine if we'd told ourselves 5 years ago that losing our inheritance would be the best thing that ever happened to us, even if we eventually got it back?" "We wouldn't have believed it," I agreed. "We couldn't have conceived of identities beyond what Mother defined for us. And now the money can serve our authentic purposes rather than shaping us to its demands," he observed. "That's the difference." After they departed, Ethan and I stood at our apartment window, looking out at the Brooklyn neighborhood we'd come to love, so different from Newport's manicured perfection, yet rich with a diversity and energy I'd never experienced in my former life. "Will you miss this if we split time between here and Newport?" Ethan asked, his arm around my waist. "We don't have to choose," I reminded him. "That's the gift in all this. Options without obligation. We can maintain our life here while extending our work through the Newport property." "And your mother?" he asked gently. "Where does she fit in this new vision?" I sighed, considering the question that had been hovering at the edges of my thoughts. Mother had rejected me completely when I chose love over her approval. She had altered her will, specifically to punish that choice. Now, circumstances had reversed our positions. She lived in a house that legally belonged partly to me. her financial future partially dependent on decisions Maxwell and I would make. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "That would just be playing by her rules, seeing relationships as transactions and love as conditional." "What do you want?" Ethan asked. "Boundaries," I decided. "Compassion without capitulation. She can stay in the east wing of the Newport house if she respects the new purpose of the main property. She remains my mother, but that doesn't give her authority over my choices." Ethan nodded, understanding. "Not rejection, but redefinition." "Exactly," I agreed. "The same approach we're taking to the inheritance itself. We accept it without being defined by it. We use it according to our values, not the expectations attached to it." As we prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this unexpected juncture. 5 years earlier, Mother had changed her will when I married the wrong guy, leaving everything to Maxwell. That decision meant to punish me for choosing love over legacy had instead liberated me to discover who I truly was, beyond the Harrison name and fortune. Now, through Father's posthumous intervention, the inheritance had partially returned. But I was no longer the person who had left Newport seeking approval and identity. I was Olivia Reeves, wife, co-founder, advocate, with values and purpose independent of financial status. The most valuable inheritance, I realized as sleep approached, wasn't the money or property that had unexpectedly returned to us. It was the strength, clarity, and authenticity we'd developed when those external trappings were stripped away. That was the legacy no one could ever disinherit us from. The understanding that true wealth lies not in what you own, but in who you become when everything else falls away. Transforming the Newport mansion from a symbol of old money exclusivity into the Adaptation Alliance Global Center required months of careful planning. Architects presented designs that preserved the historic character of the house while adapting spaces for new purposes: conference rooms, collaborative workspaces, accommodations for visiting community leaders, and multimedia facilities to document Indigenous environmental knowledge. Through it all, Mother remained in the East Wing, a silent presence during planning meetings, her displeasure evident in her rigid posture and tight smiles whenever we encountered her. She had accepted the arrangement not out of enthusiasm, but necessity. The SEC investigation had resulted in a substantial settlement that had significantly reduced her personal assets, while professional restrictions now prevented her from managing financial interests. 6 months after our unexpected inheritance, I found myself standing in what had once been the mansion's grand ballroom, now transformed into a light-filled central gathering space. The crystal chandeliers remained, but the gilt-framed portraits of Harrison ancestors had been replaced with stunning photography from communities we worked with: coastal villages building floating gardens in Bangladesh, Indigenous fire management practices in Australia, water conservation systems in Kenya. What would Grandmother Harrison say about this? Maxwell mused, joining me as I supervised the installation of a digital mapping table that would display climate vulnerability data. She'd be horrified, I admitted, remembering our formidable grandmother who had considered the ballroom sacred space, reserved for debutante presentations and charity galas where guest lists were scrutinized with genealogical precision. But, Father? Maxwell asked, his tone softer. I considered this. Father had been different from the rest of the Harrison line, more thoughtful, less concerned with appearances, genuinely interested in the world beyond Newport's rarefied circles. His library had contained books on environmental science, indigenous cultures, and sustainable development long before such topics became mainstream concerns. I think he'd understand, I said finally. Maybe even approve. The center's official opening was scheduled for early summer, timed to coincide with an international climate adaptation conference in Boston. We had invited community leaders from each location where Adaptation Alliance worked, arranging visas, transportation, and accommodations for people who had never traveled internationally before. The Wellington Foundation had provided additional funding specifically for this gathering, recognizing the unprecedented opportunity to bring frontline environmental innovators together in dialogue with policymakers and scientists. 2 weeks before the opening, I received an unexpected message from Mother's assistant requesting a meeting in her private sitting room. Mother had largely avoided direct communication with Maxwell and me during the renovation process, relaying any necessary information through intermediaries. A direct summons was unprecedented in our new dynamic. I found her where she had always preferred to receive visitors, seated in her favorite Queen Anne chair by the window overlooking the rose garden, a silver tea service arranged on the table beside her. She had aged visibly in the month since. The SEC investigation, new lines etched around her mouth, her posture slightly less imperious than before. Yet she still projected the dignified authority that had defined her throughout my childhood. "Olivia," she acknowledged as I entered. "Thank you for coming." "Mother," I replied, taking the seat she indicated opposite her. "Is everything all right?" She poured tea with practiced precision, the familiar ritual seeming to steady her. "I've been observing the preparations for your center," she said, handing me a cup. "It appears to be nearing completion." "Yes," I confirmed. "We open in 2 weeks. Leaders from 12 countries will be arriving next week for preliminary workshops." She nodded, absorbing this information. "And will they be staying? Here? In the house?" "In the guest wing," I clarified. "The rooms have been renovated to accommodate them comfortably." A flicker of something, distaste perhaps, or resignation, crossed her features before she carefully masked it. "I see. And what exactly will they be doing during their time here?" I explained the center's purpose more fully than I had before, describing how community representatives would share their innovations, document their approaches, and collaborate with each other while connecting with resources to expand their work. As I spoke, I noticed Mother listening with unexpected attentiveness, occasionally asking clarifying questions that suggested actual interest rather than mere politeness. "These people," she said when I finished, "the ones coming from these various communities, they're experts in their field? Professionals?" I understood the subtext of her question. Were these visitors people of standing, individuals worthy of the Harrison Mansion according to her hierarchical worldview? "They're knowledge holders," I explained carefully. "Some have formal education, others possess generations of traditional ecological wisdom. All have developed practical solutions to environmental challenges affecting their communities." Mother sipped her tea, considering this. "And your husband, what role does he play in all this?" The slight hesitation before "husband" didn't escape my notice, but her willingness to acknowledge Ethan at all represented progress. "Ethan is our visual documentation lead," I explained. "His photography and film work helps communities share their innovations with wider audiences. He's training local documentarians to capture their own stories." She nodded again, her expression unreadable. We sat in silence for several moments, the only sound the delicate clink of china as she returned her cup to its saucer. "I've received an invitation," she said finally, "to the opening reception." "Yes," I confirmed. "We included you on the guest list, as a resident of the property and as my mother." The acknowledgement of our relationship, strained as it was, hung in the air between us. "I've been considering whether to attend," she continued. "It would be unusual for me to be present as a guest rather than a hostess in what was once my home." I recognized the complexity behind her statement, the loss of status, the reversal of roles, the public acknowledgement of changed circumstances. "It's still your home," I said gently. "The East Wing remains your private residence for as long as you wish. Your presence at the opening would be meaningful." She met my gaze directly for perhaps the first time since my return to Newport. "Would it?" I rather thought you and Maxwell would prefer I remain out of sight. A relic of the old regime, so to speak. The surprising self-awareness in her comment caught me off guard. We've never asked you to hide, Mother. The center's purpose differs from your vision for this house, certainly, but that doesn't erase your connection to it or to us. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth exactly, but a slight softening of the rigid control she typically maintained. Your father would have found this all quite fascinating, she said unexpectedly. He always did have interests beyond what was conventional for someone in his position. The mention of father, not as a weapon or comparison but as a shared memory, created a moment of fragile connection between us. He inspired more of this than you might realize, I acknowledged. His books, his questions, his curiosity about the world beyond Newport. They shaped both Maxwell and me, though we didn't recognize it until later. Mother's gaze drifted to the window, toward the gardens father had loved tending himself, despite our gardener's protests about appropriate activities for the master of the house. He was never quite contained by the responsibilities of the Harrison name. It frustrated me at times, his willingness to look beyond established boundaries. This admission, perhaps the most honest reflection on her marriage I'd ever heard from her, revealed glimpses of the complex woman behind the perfect society matriarch. I wondered suddenly about her own journey, the expectations and constraints that had shaped her long before I was born. What did you want, Mother? I asked quietly. Before the Harrison name, before the social position, before Maxwell and me, what dreams did you have for yourself? She looked startled by the question, as if no one had ever inquired about her personal aspirations, separate from her roles as wife, mother, and society leader. That's hardly relevant now, she said, reverting briefly to her dismissive tone. I think it is, I pressed gently. You've seen my journey to define myself beyond the identity I was assigned. I'm curious about yours. For a moment, I thought she would refuse to engage, retreat behind the polished facade she'd maintained throughout my childhood. Instead, she set down her teacup with deliberate care and smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. I wanted to study architecture, she said finally, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I had quite a talent for design, according to my teachers. I won a scholarship to a very good program. I didn't know that, I said, genuinely surprised. The formal dining room and drawing room downstairs had been redesigned under her direction when I was young, but I'd never connected that project to any personal passion. There was no reason you should know, she replied. It was before I met your father before I understood what would be expected of a Harrison wife. The scholarship went to someone else. I focused instead on becoming the kind of woman a man of your father's standing would consider suitable. The revelation stunned me. Not just the abandoned dream itself, but the matter-of-fact way she described surrendering her ambitions to social expectations. I had always seen Mother's rigid adherence to Newport's unwritten rules as natural inclination rather than learned behavior. Did you ever regret it? I asked. Giving up architecture? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I redirected that interest. The restoration of this house, the remodeling projects over the years, they allowed me some creative expression within acceptable boundaries. I thought about the careful precision she'd always brought to those projects, the detailed attention to historical accuracy, the subtle innovations that modernized the space while honoring its heritage. What might she have created with formal training and cultural permission to pursue her talent professionally? Perhaps, I suggested carefully, you might consider consulting on historical aspects of the center renovation. There are several spaces where we're trying to balance preservation with new functionality. She regarded me with surprise, clearly not expecting such an invitation. You would welcome my input? After everything? Your knowledge of this house and period architecture is valuable, I said truthfully. And yes, despite everything, you remain connected to this place and to us. Something unspoken passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, nor reconciliation in any complete sense, but a tentative acknowledgement that the rigid opposition of our positions might not be permanent or absolute. "I will consider it," she said finally, "and I will attend the opening reception." As I left her sitting room, I felt a strange sense of discovery, as if I'd glimpsed a different woman behind the mother I'd spent decades alternately pleasing and defying. Her revelation about abandoned architectural ambitions couldn't excuse her subsequent coldness or conditional love, but it added dimension to the flat portrait I'd carried of her. The week before the center's opening brought a flurry of activity as community representatives arrived from around the world. Seeing the Newport mansion through their eyes offered yet another perspective on my childhood home. What had seemed normal to me, the scale, the ornamentation, the sheer excess of space, appeared extraordinary to people from communities where entire families lived in dwellings smaller than our kitchen. "Your family lived here alone?" asked Priya, a brilliant young woman from coastal Bangladesh who had developed floating agricultural platforms that rose and fell with increasingly unpredictable flood levels. "Just the four of us," I confirmed, "plus household staff." She nodded thoughtfully, running her hand along the marble fireplace in what was now a collaborative workspace. "So much resource concentrated in so few hands," she observed without judgment. "Like my country's challenges in miniature." Her comment stayed with me throughout the day, a simple articulation of the wealth inequality I'd taken for granted throughout my childhood. The Harrison fortune hadn't appeared excessive within Newport's rarefied context, where similar mansions lined Bellevue Avenue and conversations about yacht maintenance were casual dinner topics. Now, hosting people whose communities faced existential threats from climate disasters, the disproportionate distribution of resources became impossible to ignore. Yet rather than simple guilt or defensiveness, I felt growing conviction about our decision to repurpose this symbol of concentrated wealth into a center for environmental justice. The mansion's transformation paralleled my own journey, from passive inheritor to active creator, from privileged insularity to global connection. The opening reception brought together an unprecedented mix of people in the Newport mansion's grand spaces. Environmental activists conversed with policy experts beside the ornate fireplace where Mother had once vetted potential suitors. Indigenous elders demonstrated sustainable farming techniques in the conservatory where Newport society had once taken tea. Community leaders from frontline climate disaster zones shared strategies in the library where Father had taught me to read. Throughout the evening, I watched Mother navigate this unfamiliar social landscape. She had dressed formally, as always, in a tailored blue suit with the restrained elegance that had been her signature in Newport circles. Initially, she remained at the periphery, observing rather than engaging, maintaining the slight distance of a proper hostess, even though she no longer held that role. Then something unexpected happened. An elderly gentleman from a remote Alaskan community approached her, admiring the architectural details of the drawing room's ceiling. I tensed, anticipating Mother's reflexive dismissal of someone so far outside her social sphere. Instead, I observed her explaining the restoration work she had overseen decades earlier, pointing out particular features with unmistakable knowledge and subtle pride. From across the room, Maxwell joined me in watching this interaction. "Is that Mother actually connecting with someone?" he murmured, equal parts amused and astonished. "Apparently, his village is working to preserve traditional building techniques while adapting to permafrost thaw," I explained. He recognized her expertise in historical preservation. "Common ground in unlikely places," Maxwell observed. "Who would have thought?" As the evening progressed, I noticed Mother engaged in several more substantive conversations, primarily about architectural elements of the mansion. but occasionally expanding to the adaptation strategies being presented. She maintained her characteristic reserve, but there was something different in her demeanor. A quality of attention I hadn't witnessed before in her interactions outside our social class. Near the reception's conclusion, Margaret Wellington approached me, champagne flute in hand. "Congratulations, Olivia," she said warmly. "What you've created here is truly remarkable, not just the center itself, but the convergence of perspectives it represents." "Thank you," I replied. "We couldn't have done it without the Wellington Foundation's support." She smiled, glancing around the room where unlikely connections continued to form across cultural, economic, and geographic boundaries. "Your journey has been extraordinary, you know. From Harrison heiress to disinherited rebel to visionary leader, all while refusing to be defined by either your privilege or its absence." Her observation captured something essential about the path I'd traveled. I had to lose the inheritance to discover what really mattered, I acknowledged, and when part of it unexpectedly returned, that clarity helped me use it purposefully rather than be used by it. "That's the wisdom most wealth inheritors never acquire," Margaret noted. "They're either trapped by golden handcuffs or rejecting privilege without building anything meaningful in its place. You found a third path, transformation rather than acceptance or rejection." As the reception wound down, I found myself momentarily alone in what had once been Father's study, now converted into a digital storytelling lab where community partners could create multimedia presentations of their environmental innovations. The room retained his desk, the massive mahogany piece where he had taught me about investment principles and encouraged my interest in global affairs. "Your father would approve," Mother said quietly, appearing in the doorway. "Of all this." I turned, surprised by her presence and her comment. "You think so?" She entered fully, her gaze taking in the technology that now filled the space while noting the preserved elements of Father's domain. "He always said the Harrison fortune should serve a purpose beyond itself." I didn't fully understand what he meant then. "And now," I ventured. "Now I see that wealth without purpose becomes a prison," she said, the admission clearly difficult for her. "For the holder as much as for those excluded from it." The insight surprised me coming from her, the woman who had defined her entire identity through the Harrison name and position, who had cut off both children for choosing authentic lives over appropriate ones. "What will you do now, Mother?" I asked. "Beyond consulting on the historical aspects of the center?" She considered the question with uncharacteristic openness. "I'm not entirely certain. For the first time in decades, my path isn't clearly defined by social expectations or family obligations. That uncertainty can be liberating," I suggested. "It allows for possibilities you might never have considered otherwise." She nodded slowly. "Your father once told me something similar, shortly before he became ill. He suggested we travel more widely after you and Maxwell were settled, not to the usual destinations, but to places where people lived differently, thought differently." I dismissed it as impractical then. "It's not too late," I pointed out. "The center will host community leaders from around the world. You could begin those different conversations right here." Mother didn't respond directly, but her expression held contemplation rather than rejection. After a moment, she straightened slightly, resuming some of her customary formality. "The reception was illuminating. Your guests are quite accomplished in their fields." Coming from her, this represented extraordinary acknowledgement of people she would previously have considered beneath notice. Not warmth exactly, not full acceptance, but a window opening where there had once been only walls. "Thank you for attending," I said simply. "It meant something, your presence here." She nodded once, then departed with the measured dignity that had always characterized her movements through these rooms, leaving me to reflect on the subtle shifts in our relationship. Not reconciliation in any complete sense, but perhaps the Beginning of mutual recognition across the divide of divergent values and choices. The following morning, as community representatives gathered for the center's first official working session, I found myself standing on the mansion's wide front steps, watching the sunrise illuminate Newport Harbor in the distance. Ethan joined me, coffee mugs in hand. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, passing me a steaming cup. I smiled, accepting both the coffee and his presence beside me. "I was thinking about inheritance," I said. "Not just money or property, but the less tangible legacies we receive and pass on." "And what conclusion did you reach?" he asked. "That true inheritance isn't what's given to us, but what we choose to carry forward," I reflected. "From all that my parents bestowed, intentionally or not, I've selected certain elements to integrate into my own identity while leaving others behind. Father's curiosity and sense of purpose. Mother's determination and attention to detail, if not her rigidity." Ethan nodded, understanding as always. "The most valuable inheritance is discernment, knowing what to accept and what to transform." Behind us, the mansion was awakening to its new purpose. Voices speaking different languages echoed through spaces once reserved for a single privileged family and its carefully selected guests. Maps and diagrams covered walls where ancestors' portraits had hung. Technology enabled connections to communities facing rising seas and changing weather patterns around the world. When Mother changed her will after I married the wrong guy, leaving everything to my brother, she thought she was punishing me, I said. She couldn't have imagined she was actually liberating me to discover what truly matters. "And now that you've unexpectedly inherited part of it back?" Ethan asked. "Now I understand that wealth is just a tool, not an identity," I said. "Its value lies in how we use it, not in its mere possession." Inside, the day's sessions were beginning. Community leaders whose wisdom had been developed through necessity rather than privilege were sharing solutions born of direct experience with environmental challenges. Scientists and policymakers were listening to perspectives rarely included in official climate discussions. Connections were forming across boundaries of geography, culture, and economic status. This was the true inheritance I had discovered. Not the Harrison name or fortune, but the ability to create meaningful bridges between worlds that rarely connected. The journey from dutiful daughter to disinherited rebel to purposeful leader had taught me that authentic value comes not from what you own, but from what you build, not from status conferred, but from impact created. As Ethan and I turned to join the gathering inside, I felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun when Mother changed her will had come full circle, not returning me to where I started, but bringing me to a new understanding of inheritance, legacy, and purpose. The path forward was not defined by either acceptance or rejection of my privileged background, but by its thoughtful transformation into something that served a purpose beyond itself. Mother had tried to control my life through inheritance, never realizing that the most valuable legacy was the freedom to choose my own path and define success on my own terms. That was an inheritance no one could ever take away, and one I hope to pass on to others through the center's work and my own example. The morning light illuminated the mansion's windows, casting new patterns through old glass. Like that light, I had found my way through the structures of privilege, expectation, and tradition, not by destroying them entirely, but by allowing their best elements to be transformed into something more inclusive, more purposeful, and ultimately more meaningful than anything I could have inherited passively. That transformation, from receiving to creating, from exclusivity to connection, from status to purpose, was the true gift that had emerged from losing my inheritance. And in that loss, I had found something far more valuable: myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,